Nobody said yes. So they at least gave a thumbs up. So either they don't want to hear me and they're good with that, or they can hear me. So thank you for coming tonight to hear about Division 4 measurement rules. I want to start off. My name is Jason Ullman. I'm the state engineer and the director for the Division of Water Resources. I actually began my career with the Division of Water Resources in Montrose in the Division 4 office as the assistant division engineer for 11 years. And then was the deputy state engineer, still living in Montrose for 3 years, and was appointed state engineer last year. So have a fairly long history with DWR, and I spent 17 years living in this area. So this is really nice to come home, really. I mean, my kids all grew up here, so not in Gunnison, but in this area. So we have a few people here from our staff, so I'm going to introduce them. Marie Sullivan is our outreach coordinator. Andy Nasevich is from the Attorney General's office. Bob Herford, the division engineer for Division 4. And then we have Evan Jones, the assistant division engineer, and Tom Rosman, who you probably know as the water commissioner, and Jack Brzezinski, the water commissioner on Tomichi Creek. And then I want to thank Sonia for allowing us to use her space and reconfigure it for this meeting. We probably didn't have to, but well,
No, we're
you never know how many people are going to show up. So, so what we're here to talk about is measurement rules in the Gunnison. So I'll start by saying this is a West Slope wide effort. We've already done West Slope. We've already done what measurement rules in Division 6, which is the Yampa, white and green, and the North Platte. And we've done measurement rules in the southwest part of the state in Division 7. The ones in this Division 6 were signed in January of 2024. And the ones in Division 7 were signed just last week on Thursday, and they go into effect in June. So Division 4 is the next one. And we're doing them in division by division on the West Slope because each division has some uniqueness to it that make it more effective to do division specific rules. They may be not completely different from each other, but there is some uniqueness that is good to recognize in the rules. We have 4 stakeholder meetings planned. Last night we were in Delta. We had a pretty good crowd in Delta. Tonight, Gunnison, and then we have 2 more next week in Norwood and Montrose. So if you want to be groupies and follow us around, you can go on the road show to Norwood. But after the presentation, we're going to be like, why the heck would I want to do that? So anyway, so next slide. So I think it's first important to define why is it important to have measuring on your diversions from the stream. So these measurement rules are primarily about diversions from the stream. And there are a few reasons for it. One is intrastate administration. Bob is going to talk a little bit about how we administer water rights throughout the state of Colorado, but specifically in Division 4. We can't administer those rights without measurement, which he'll explain pretty clearly why that's difficult to do, and make sure that proper people are using water that have the senior water rights when there's not enough water to satisfy everybody. Second reason is that, there's no compact need to do any curtailment on the West Slope right now because we've always been in compliance with the Colorado River Compact. We remain in compliance today. It appears we'll be in compliance for a while going forward. But it is difficult to shift gears really quickly when you have basins that don't have as much consistent measurement. And then all of a sudden now you have to do more widespread administration. And the supply, those of you that are, producers and users of water know that the supply has been going down. We've had a 25-year drought that has really affected flows in our streams, which we also have demand that isn't decreasing. And so we've seen an increase in administration. I just had to sign an order declaring the White River over appropriated a few months ago because of that same supply and demand imbalance. So the idea is to get ahead of being able to administer for a widespread call before that happens. The other thing is data. So having good data for your structure on what you've taken is good for you to actually protect your water right. It's good to have good data for you to, if you want to ever use your water right in a different way, if you want to change it, you need to do a historical consumptive use analysis. If you have accurate records of what you've diverted, it makes that process easier, and it also gives you a chance to get through the water court process. So accurate records are important for you as water users. It protects Colorado water users if we do compact compliance in other basins where we are, like the South Platte, the Rio Grande, and the Arkansas, where we do daily or yearly compact compliance administration. Measurement is how we make sure that Colorado maximizes its beneficial use that we are allowed to within the compacts while we still meet those obligations to the downstream states. And then the third one is that diversion records are actually required by statute. So the statute says that Bob and the division engineer's office have to report to the state engineer every year the water that's been diverted from the natural streams and what it was used for. And so if there's good measurement and we're not estimating a lot of this, it makes for better record, which then also makes for better models when we look at models for either compact issues when we're trying to calculate consumptive use under these compacts, or for you guys to use when you're evaluating your operations. So that data is really helpful. Next slide. So one question, I participated in most of the meetings in Division 7, the stakeholder meetings we did. And one of the questions you get is, you already have the authority to do this, right? So why do we need measurement rules? And yes, that's true. We can issue an order to somebody to install a measuring device. The statute in this section 3784-112 directs that, owners are responsible for installing measurement on their devices, on their diversions, if they want to take water from the stream, because water is a public resource that's dedicated in the Constitution, that you get a right to use. And, but the thing is, in that language in the statute, it says, owners of ditches, et cetera, shall erect where necessary. And so this measurement rules process is one, trying to helping to define in a consistent way where it's necessary. Next slide. So that one that I just talked about, when or where is measurement necessary? In some of our divisions where we have just groundwater measurement rules right now, like Division 1, which is the South Platte, Division 2, the Arkansas, Division 3, the Rio Grande, that where necessary has been answered, for decades, because we have compacts that we do administration. We have very tight administration that occurs all year round. And so measurement has been required. And so we have more consistent measuring. On the West Slope, where there are some tributaries that may have not been under call very often, it's not maybe as consistently measured in a way that makes it accurate. And so this is going to define where it's necessary so that if we have to do more widespread administration, we have those measuring devices. They also define where a head gate is necessary. Bob will talk a little bit about what the division engineer's office needs to administer a water right, but head gates are kind of helpful when we need to shut off and curtail users to differing amounts. It defines what constitutes an adequate measurement method, and how accurate we would consider it to be appropriate. And then last, these rules define a process and a timeline for implementation and evaluating that adequacy. So we'll talk about that as well under the phase-in section of the rules. Next slide. So there's also some cases where these rules as written, they don't apply. And one of them is we are interested in taking records of water diverted from the stream. So that's the diversion record we make, is water diverted from the stream. What did it get used for? If you have a ditch system that has a bunch of laterals on it, those laterals are within what we would call the down ditch system. This the rules don't specify what measurement is required at those laterals, just at the head gate off the stream. And so it doesn't apply to laterals and to other diversions. Also, we had a recent question about this, and it doesn't apply to meters on your house. We're not looking to meter what is going to each house in a distribution system. It's primarily for diversions from the stream or from the ground. It doesn't apply to exempt domestic wells, which we'll get into when we talk about the rules themselves, but under the exceptions in Rule 3, exempt domestic wells. So if you have a well for 15 gallons a minute just for in-house domestic, 1 acre of lawn and garden, it doesn't apply to those. And then there's a bunch of other exceptions outlined in the rules, including ponds that are for the limited purpose of livestock watering and wildlife watering and fire protection. Those do not have to have measuring. Surface water diversions, including springs that don't exceed 15 gallons a minute. So if you have a spring that is similar to an exempt well, it's only being used for those domestic uses. Those are also in the exemptions. So I'm going to turn over to Bob to explain how we administer water.
Okay, good. Thank you. And thanks for putting that previous slide in. That keep everybody's, I think, head in the game a little bit better, right? And so we use this word, you hear this word administration a lot. That's part of our vernacular in the Division of Water Resources. It simply means ensuring it's the work that we do to ensure that water is going to where it's supposed to be going. And we have a saying, if you see water flowing, put it where it belongs. And here in the Upper Gunnison, we probably do a little bit less of this, the hardcore administration, shutting ditches off. This picture on the right, what our water commissioners are doing here is they're throttling somebody back as the supply in the stream is waning after the runoff. They're curtailing water rights, and you'll see that as a pretty substantial head gate, right? So that's part of one of the things that we need. So in this example, you see this stream running through coming out of the mountains. You've got this junior water right upstream and a senior water right down below. Seniors first, right? Everybody knows that in Colorado, seniors first. And so that's what this administration is really all about. Next slide, please. So here's the situation. Here's the river, and there's competition on the stream, on every stream. In this situation, this downstream guy, Ditch B, he's the senior. And he's calling and he's saying, hey, Mr. Water Commissioner, we're short. What does Water Commissioner do? In this situation, well, you know what? To place a call, there's a standard for that. You need a lockable, controllable head gate. You need to be taking all the water that's available, and you need to measure. So you can't administer what you can't measure. Okay. So in this case, we'd say, I'm sorry, it's put in a head gate and put in a measuring device, then we'll talk. So go to the next slide, please. All right. He does the work. He puts in a head gate, puts in a measuring flume. He's short. And what's going on with the stream system now? What if A is he's taking too much and C is taking, let's say, 80 CFS? Is it right to curtail this guy? Well, actually, yes. What we could do in the past, and you've heard Jason mention this, what we would normally do is we'd write an order. I would write an order from my desk that says something to the effect based on, the statute you saw in a previous slide, 3784-112. Thou shalt put in a measuring device by a certain date, or we will curtail your water supply, and we won't deliver any water. So we can't shut them off. The main point is that Ditch B is placing a valid call. It is conceivable that we might curtail these completely and then start letting the next guy in line start taking some water and to the amount that their water supply is available in the stream, but that's not efficient, and water commissioners are going to get a little grumpy in that kind of a situation. Next slide, please. All right, everybody's playing ball now. Everybody's got a head gate. Everybody's got a measuring device. What a valid call by ditch B. Now it's game on. Okay, we have 100 CFS water right at C. We have a 50 CFS water right at ditch A. So we're going to start curtailing C to the extent that B is satisfied. The downstream senior is satisfied. If curtailing ditch C still doesn't do it, we move to ditch B. And so then, to ditch A. And so we say that the call rests at the date of this water right here, if that makes sense. Okay, and that's what administration is all about. So our water commissioners, that's their main purpose throughout the irrigation season, is ensuring that water is going to those who are entitled to be receiving it in priority at their decreed amounts. And you got to have it, you need a measuring device and you need a lockable, controllable head gate to accomplish that. And so these measurement rules are really another way of really getting to the point that we really need to be at on these streams in lieu of writing orders, because we can write orders. And you might hear a question, well, what if I don't put a measuring device in? Will you shut me off? Sure, that's an absolute possibility. Okay, next slide, please. So what do we need? So that's what we've been talking about. We know your decrees. You know, our water commissioner is very familiar with who's on the stream and what their, every water right, remember, has a name, location, amount, dates, and uses. At a minimum, those 5 things. And if it's an irrigation water right, we need to know what that was decreed to irrigate. Is it this 80 acres over in this quarter section? That kind of thing. And usually it's fairly specific in the decrees. And here in the Upper Gunnison, they did a really good job historically of defining what acreage is intended to be irrigated under this water right. So you need a head gate, something that we can actually control the water supply into your ditch, a measuring device, and the place of beneficial use. So consider this. Do you think it might have ever happened before in history that somebody placed a call for water to make sure their neighbor got shut off and they let the water, they ran it through a waste gate or something, they weren't ready yet, or it has happened? That's not a valid call. We would not honor that call. And you know that he's not going to get away with it for very long, because everybody's always watching and you'll be ratted out really quickly. So that's a possibility. So you have to put the water to beneficial use. Okay. And that's part of the administration process, part of the great things that we look at. The next slide, please. So what is a functioning head gate or control structure? This is a really good one. What it might be difficult to see is there's a chain hanging down from that screw handle. And the way we would lock a head gate is the water commissioner is going to adjust the flow into that ditch until he's satisfied that he's got the flow right by reading the flume. So here's a proper head gate. Here's a properly set flume. And that's a good setup right there. And then he would run the chain through this structure and lock it. So you can't turn that wheel. You can't monkey with it. Every stream system was settled differently, developed differently. Some of the stream systems, the water users on those streams, they get along pretty well, and everybody's fairly honest. And we might not have a habit of locking head gates on that stream. But this stream over here, maybe they don't get along that well, and we have to lock them all. And it's pretty much one strike, you're out. So if a water commissioner sets your head gate, puts a head gate notice on it and it gets monkeyed with, there's no 3 strikes you're out. No, it's that you blew it and you're going to get locked. Okay. Here's a good diversion structure. When the water supply goes down and they place a call, they should be able to sweep the entire stream there, take all the water that's available. That's one of the criteria for a valid call. So those are good pictures. Where'd you steal those? Those are good.
Division 7.
Yeah, Division 7. Okay, those are good. Anyway, that's good. Those are great photographs, good illustrations. Now, next picture, please. Next slide, I mean. So, good or bad head gate. The head gate structure doesn't do any good laying up on the bank, right? I've literally had water users go through all the trouble to purchase measuring devices, head gate structures, get them delivered. They're sitting on the bank. And I can tell you one that's been there for 14 years, still sitting in the trees. And so next picture, please. And there's a good one. All right. This is pricey. I mean, this setup here would probably be involved for a fairly large ditch company, and there'll be a lot of farmers that are being supplied by this system here. So what he's doing, he's trying to read the staff gauge on the other side of that wall. And speaking of staff gauges, go to the next slide, please. I think, no, that next slide I'm thinking of is in.
It's after.
It's farther down. Okay,
Sorry.
So take it away.
Unless you want to keep going.
No.
You're doing great.
Okay, no, it's fun listening to you.
I don't know about that, but okay. We're trying to like mix it up so that
Yeah.
somebody isn't talking at you for 45 minutes straight.
Right. I have a tendency to put people to sleep, so.
So, these are 3 terms that are in the rules themselves, and when we get to going through the rules, you'll find them, but measurement methods is kind of the overarching term. So that covers all the different ways you could measure a diversion. Measuring devices is probably the biggest one underneath a measure. You can have a measurement method that could be a measuring device. Well, a measuring device is a physical piece of equipment, a flume, a weir, a meter that goes in the flow and has a relationship between either the velocity going through the structure or the stage, like the staff gauge, and the flow rate. Alternative measurement methods are a little bit more, they don't have a defined relationship between stage and flow that is consistent. So measuring devices is probably the most common way that people measure their flume or their diversions, but there is some alternative measurement methods that are acceptable. And so what are some measurement devices? You've seen some of these if you've been out or have your own ditches. Partial flume is by far the most common. Why is that? It was developed at CSU. I went to CSU, so Ralph Partial is obviously, but 2, it's consistent. It works in many different conditions, and our water commissioners like having consistent flumes because they can have one book with flume tables in it for all the different sizes of flumes that they see. But it's not the only way to measure. We have cutthroat flumes, ramp flumes. Ramp flumes have become more common of late because there's some computer programs that you can pretty easily design them. They also take less head, require less head. And so that concrete one there in the bottom right is a ramp flume that was custom designed in the Uncompahgre system. And then there's weirs. So you have V-notch weir up in that upper picture there is of a V-notch weir, rectangular weirs, Cipolleti weirs if you have maybe not as much space lengthwise in your ditch to measure. So there's multiple different ways and accurate ways you can use measurement devices to measure diversions. Next slide. So once you have your flume, and it's one of these common ones that has good rating table, doesn't work so well if it's not properly installed. So the measurement rules address proper installation and require it to be maintained because, I mean, this one might not be measuring all the water going through the This one might also not be measuring any of the water going through the flume. So they need to be installed properly and maintained. Sometimes it's just a matter of cleaning, cleaning down below because it gets built up and causes it to overtop the flume or to back up in a way that submerges it. But the measurement rules require proper installation. Next slide. So we have a test here now for people in the room. The water commissioners last night were like answering all the questions. So hopefully, but which one of these is working? Left, right. The one on the right works, correct. Good job. So this one, it's hard to see maybe in some, but the picture's big enough here. You can see that there's a lot of water going around the flume. That one has what makes a good flume. There's this nice calm water behind the flume. There is fall through the flume. Typically flumes and weirs have to cause the water to go through a change from subcritical to supercritical depth is the engineering term, but because that's what creates that relationship between stage and flow. So if you see a flume that's submerged, that's why it doesn't work. Next slide. So which one here? The one on the left. Yeah. Okay. That one has fall through it. It's got a good staff gauge. The other one is completely submerged and it's just kind of like a flat ditch through it. So next slide. So what are some alternative measurement methods that would be acceptable in there? The most common one is probably a rated section. Sometimes we have ditches that don't have enough fall through them to actually put a flume in. And so we have in some places done a rated section where the user will measure it many times and develop a curve or stage in the ditch equals this much flow. Usually we would require that to be in a trapezoidal section or some very consistent section that's not going to change. If you click the next one, it's going to open a picture. This is somebody that's out in the stream measuring the stream, and that's how we would create that rating table. It's also how we verify structures that are accurate is by actually going out and measuring. And so he's making one of those measurements. So the water is at that level. He gets a flow rate at that level and then goes out another time when the water level has changed. And that's how you develop that relationship. But it's more common for measuring streams because a lot of our streams don't have flumes on them. But it does get used on some canals. This is one of the Uncompahgre Valley large canals. And it is very flat, as you can see. And so this is a section where we have used a rated section measurement. And then for pipe flows, typically there is this relationship between your pump and the power that it uses and how much flow it can produce. And so we have allowed power consumption curves to be used for, but that's primarily for wells and for pumps. There's the slide Bob was looking for.
So here's your staff gauge. On the right, picture on the right, that's a nice, good, clear picture. And at the top of the photograph would be 1 foot. So this is in tenths of feet. And so this 5 actually represents a half of a foot. So 50 hundredths. And you can see that line at 5, it's got a nice little angled tip on it. The top part of that black line is actually the 0.5. As you cross the blank white space and hit the bottom of the next black hash, that would be 0.51. On top of that black line would be 0.52. So that's how you read the staff gauge. We don't read anything in between the bottom of that black line and the top of that black line. So the accuracy or the precision anyway is to 1/100th of a foot. So that's how you read a staff gauge. So what I would say right here is this is about 0.47, and this is a 2 foot flume, And on this table, if you go down the gauge height of 0.47, that corresponds to 2.48 cubic feet per second. If that flume is set correctly and you have proper flow through it. And Jason will talk more about what the accuracy of flumes and what we accept is for measuring devices and accuracy. So anyway, that's how you would read the staff gauge. They all work exactly the same way. So why do we record and report all these diversions? Jason mentioned in the beginning, we're required to by statute to make a record of all the diversions of water in our division every year and publish that. It's valuable to the user because the value of your water right. Any of you have ever been to Aaron Clay's water law in a nutshell training? One of the first things he says that the value of your water right is based on the use. And how do you know how much water you've used and are consuming unless you're measuring that? So it's very important for maintaining that value of your water right. It also protects it against abandonment. So you'll never be on an abandonment list, division engineer's abandonment list, if you demonstrating that I got diversion records. I don't have any breaks in my diversion records ever. And also for optimizing operations. If you know like precisely how much water you're diverting, putting out onto your field, that's better for your operations. As far as the system goes, in the state of Colorado, of course, is very interested in protecting its entitlement under the Colorado River Compact and being able to demonstrate to lower basin states under the compact what our use of water is, that we're within our entitlement under the compact. And also, these diversion records, they are actually available online, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we collect those records, but there's a transparency there today that never was there before, and you can show and demonstrate your use of water. Those records are available to the public 24 hours a day. And that also would also help improve cooperative efforts. And I hesitate on even using this term, but we internally, we will kind of use this term of self-administration. And so back in the day, I'll pick Ohio Creek. Back in the day, there was a time when everybody got along, they all knew what they were taking, and when water got short, hey, I am finishing up. If you want to start turning on, then I'll dry up because I want to cut on this week, and then I should be needing water again by such and such a date. Does that work for you? We call that self-administration, but that makes it, I got the feeling y'all know what I'm talking about. And so at any rate, that good measuring and transparency really helps in cooperative efforts. Next slide, please. Thank you. So types and typical types of recording. This is a stage discharge recording device, and it's recording how much water is going through this flume with some certain electronics inside there. And our water commissioner can pull up to that, open the lid, hook his computer up into the data logger, download that data. We use these typically on trans-basin diversions, trans-mountain and trans-basin type diversions. So there's a few here in the upper Gunnison where water's leaving the basin. Those have stage discharge recorders on them. The good old-fashioned water commissioner's got a book in his pocket. He's going to go by your structure. He's going to write it down, but then he has to transcribe that into a database. That's 2 steps. And there's room for error. We're trying to eliminate this as much as possible. But we do. We've got today, there's an app for that. And so our water commissioners actually use a special app to collect that diversion record. The phone acts like a GPS. It knows where you're at. So when he turns the app on, the ditch is going to pop up. And this is the water class coding. This is a direct flow diversion to irrigation. So we know he's got the right water class. Okay. It could be a diversion to storage, in which case that class would be different. And got the date, and he can calculate by putting in the reading from the staff gauge, and then he will hit save, and that data goes right into the database. It's done. It really eliminates a lot of error. And we were talking last night. Jason was explaining to me that one of the goals is to create an app for public use. So you could have one of these apps on your phone, and you could collect your own diversion record, because you know what? Water commissioner, I know he won't be here for 2 weeks, but I'm taking my max flow right now. I want to put that in. I want to get my max flow for the season and get that in. So then that data will go into a container of some sort where the water commissioner will review that and accept it, and it will go into the database as an official record. And then finally, like Jason was explaining, we might have a stream gauge. And there's also gauges that are on canals, ditches, that are recording the flow in the ditch or canal or stream 24/7. That they have instrumentation and telemetry that automatically puts that into a database, and that data can be viewed with various web tools, and it also is pretty transparent as well. Next slide, please. Reporting. So typical reporting types. We'll talk about reporting. Reporting is done, or that data, as I was explaining earlier, is put into our reports in places that you can go to access it, which there's online web tools that you use to access the data, but it's done various ways. The brute force way is, like I explained, a water commissioner is literally making a visit to your flume, reading it, maybe putting that in his app and getting the data up. I explained how a stage discharge recorder, that water commissioner would download that data onto his laptop, and then that would get into the database. Another way, electronically. Telemetry, like the gauges that are installed on a stream, a ditch, or a canal. Those are expensive. They require highly trained hydrographers to get them calibrated and working all the time correctly. And then user supplied data. Here's something new for me anyway, and it's done commonly in divisions 1 and 2, and I'm supposed 3, right? You can get an account, and through what is called REST services, correctly? Did I get that right? And so you can actually log on to our website and have your own portal where you can upload your user collected data. It gets reviewed, and once it's reviewed, it gets accepted. So there's multiple ways that, we can, data gets reported. Next slide, please. And now I'll take it away. Andy Nasevich.
Thanks everyone. Like Bob said, my name is Andy Nasevich. I'm an attorney with the Attorney General's office. Thanks again for having us here. I'm going to talk about the legal process for these rules, specifically the water court process. So yeah, right now we're in the stakeholder process where, Jason and the rest of us for a little bit. Oh, thank you. There we go.
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, right now we're in the stakeholder process where, we're going out, we're here presenting, the drafts of these rules to you all, their purpose, their need. But once that's finished, there's going to be the water court process. And so what's going to happen at the end of the stakeholder process is that the state engineer signs the rules, and then those get filed with the water court. We're then required to post notice of the rules in the water court resume, as well as in local newspapers, so people know what's going on. The second month after those notices are published is the deadline to file protests to the rules. And then that sets up the whole court process. Once those protests have been received, we're going to be asking the court to set case management orders for deadlines, things like expert reports. Ideally what we try and do, we've done this in 6 and we've done in 7, we've gotten a handful of protests, and, ideally, and what we've been able to do is reach those through settlements, through stipulations, and that's the desired outcome. If that doesn't happen, the case would go to a hearing, it'd go to a trial, and, it'd be kind of in my hands at that point. The court, after hearing that, can then decide, is it going to be okay with these rules and accept them? Or is it going to remand the rules back to the state engineer and say, that's not good enough. You've got some more work to do. So I want to go through this process because there's something I want to stress is the court is not being asked in that court case to say, are these rules good policy, right? Are they cost effective? That's not the court's role at that stage. The court's role is really limited to, are these rules valid or not? So are they within the state engineer's authority? Right? Does it exceed that authority? So that's really the focus of that. And so I want to mention that because the stakeholder process is really the point where Jason gets the input from you all. If there are things that need to be changed in the rules, now is the time to do it. Because when you get in the water court process, it's that decision, it's that question. Are these rules valid? Are they not? It's in the hands of attorneys at that point. This is really the process now to say, like, I don't like something about these rules. That's really where we need to hear it. Next slide, please. I do want to talk a little bit about some funding opportunities here. So the Upper Colorado River Commission has received federal funds, and $7 million of those funds have been allocated to the state of Colorado for the installation of measuring devices. So to kind of help, folks out with this process. I was hoping to be able to say that we have a subaward signed with the UCRC. We're not quite there yet. We should have that executed any day now. We were hoping to start getting installation in this year, but it's federal funds, so it's a little bit slower than we were hoping out. It might not be until next year, but we're still going to be pushing and on the optimistic time frame, hopefully get some installations this fall. The way that process is going to go is that the funds would be given to the CWCB. They're going to go through a RFP process to get a contractor on board for the installation, for the management of the project. And then we'd be doing some outreach, some advertising. People would have an opportunity to apply for the program. And then, if that application is accepted, that measuring device would be installed for you. Next slide, please. Yep, and that's, you'll look happy and have a measuring device.
I don't know why I threw those in because I felt like if there's, a lot of tension in the room, we could break it up with some comedy. We were talking about calling our program the Farmer Needs a Flume program. And so I asked AI to generate some images for a poster for a Farmer Needs a Flume program. And clearly AI isn't ready to do all of your work yet because it has no idea what a flume actually is. For some reason, it takes that ditch's water and puts it into a small little pipe in the ditch that's still there. So anyway. And similarly. Sorry, we could take those pictures out. It's kind of,
it's okay. That's okay. So like I mentioned, so the next steps, again, we're in that stakeholder process. We're going to, this is the second. We were in Delta yesterday. We're going to be in Norwood and Montrose next week. We're asking, for comments on the rules. Those have been posted. Marie has a written form you can use online to submit comments. We'll be providing, the contact information on the next slide. And again, I'd stress if you do, have those comments, do those now. We're asking for them to be submitted by May 8th. May 31st. I think how many days are in May. But yeah, and so that way we can just, move forward in addressing those comments. If we're looking at those comments and thinking, oh, these, this makes a lot of sense, we should make some revisions. If we make those substantive changes, we'll repost the rules, let folks know about it. But if, things are looking pretty good, and again, we've gone through this process in 6 and 7, made appropriate refinements. If things are looking pretty good, we'd move forward in that water court process. Thank you.
This QR code is to the comment form if you wish. It is also live on the Division 4 website. And then if you have your own red line copy that you would like to submit, please email it to both Jason and myself. Just so that it doesn't get trapped in one inbox somewhere.
So that, we're gonna go through the rules actually, too, so that we can explain them maybe in plain language. Sometimes rules end up sounding very legalistic, and so trying to explain what the meaning of each of the rules are. I would like to just emphasize what Andy said. I mean, we have some people here today, but I know that you probably have folks that you interact with out on the stream system that would be interested in learning about this. And we would like to have as many people review these and provide comments as possible. This video of tonight's meeting will be posted on our website. So Sonia, you could share it with whatever lists you have, if they want to watch, so that they get the picture of what we're doing before they want to make a comment. But so we will not stop at every rule because some of them are just required. So the title, Rule 1, we don't need to talk about the title. Rule 2 is just state engineer's authority to promulgate rules such as this. So Rule 3, if you're following along in your chamber copy, please ask questions as you have them. Don't wait till the end, because this is a good chance for you to get those questions answered or comments. Rule 3 defines the exemptions from the rules. So the scope of the rules include diversions, groundwater diversions, storage, release, and delivery of surface water or groundwater in Division 4. With the exception of these things that are listed in 3.11 through 3145. So the exemptions, we already talked a little bit about some of these, but just to how it looks in the rules is, 311 is the exemption for the rules for exempt wells for domestic purposes. 312 is the exemption for ponds used for livestock watering and wildlife purposes and fire protection purposes. 313 is head stabilization ponds. We didn't talk about that earlier. If you have a pond in your ditch system that you use just to basically equalize the head, and it's part of your operations and it doesn't store water for more than 72 hours, you don't need to put measuring on it to tell us what's in your equalization pond. Springs that are not diverted at greater than 15 gallons a minute and are only used for the same things that an exempt well would be used for, recognizing that a lot of those supplies for homes off of springs are similar to exempt wells, don't need to be measured. And then erosion control dams and any diversion structure that's declared to be an inactive diversion structure in accordance with Rule 9. So in Rule 9, we'll talk about there is a process by which you can, if you're not going to use a structure and you don't want to get a notice that you don't have an adequate measuring device, you could file with the division office to make it an inactive structure. So the purpose, I think we've kind of covered this, but I mean, really it's to establish a consistent and reliable standard that we have to go, and we go through a stakeholder process like this to do it. So people have an understanding of what the division engineer expects you to have if you're taking water from the natural stream. The statute, like I said, gives us the authority, but it doesn't, the statute's pretty short. It doesn't give very clear direction on what we would expect. So Rule 4 is definitions for things. We don't need to cover all of them. We talked alternative measurement methods. The structure is pretty obvious, the structure that used to divert water. There's a couple in here. So inactive diversion structure is specifically defined as something that you have filed to be inactive. We already covered measurement devices and measurement methods. On-stream reservoirs and off-stream reservoirs, we will talk about those in a later Rule 6. So other structure is the question we had last night. So is related to another question we had last night. So if you have a ditch that takes water and then dumps water back to the stream at some point downstream, or, there's other structures used to operate that we would need to know the amount going through them in order to administer the river properly, that's what other structures cover. So if you have a wasteway or something that we would need to know how much is being wasted out of it. We have in some divisions, a lot of augmentation stations that are required to deliver water back to the stream. And so that is kind of a nod to that too. A qualified tester. So basically a qualified tester is anyone who is qualified to measure, go out and actually do what that guy in the stream was doing and measure with a device what is flowing through a ditch, a stream. And our hydrographers that work for the Division of Water Resources obviously are qualified. A lot of the measurements that our water commissioners do, if Tom looks at a structure and says, I'm not sure if this is accurate, he may ask our hydrographer to come out and measure it to verify whether or not it meets the standard, which we'll get into here in a second. You could also, as a user, hire somebody, if you have a consultant, to come do it, as long as they are qualified to use those devices. We would evaluate that when they submit their measurement to us. We're not doing some certification program for qualified testers. Total volume is pretty self-explanatory, water users. So I think we can go to Rule 5. So the headgate requirements are in Rule 5. So this is fairly short, but it's really important. Because as Bob was stating, we can't administer water without a headgate, really. I mean, we have places in Division 4 that I'm aware of from my time here where there's no headgate. And so people expect us to go out and shovel in their ditch when the river goes on call. Well, I don't have enough money to pay for a backhoe for all of my water commissioners. So a headgate is important so that they can actually lock and control the flow going in to your structure. So this defines that, short and sweet, that you must have a headgate that allow the water commissioner or owner at the direction of the water commissioner to accurately adjust the diversion of water with reasonable effort. So if your structure is pretty much stuck shut and has been stuck shut or is welded shut, that doesn't count. Or welded open, maybe it's stuck shut, we don't care. But it's stuck open within a reasonable amount of time. So that is a nod to the picture you saw in Bob's part of the presentation where the head gate is pretty close to the flume. It needs to be pretty close to where the diversion is because they don't want to spend all day going back and forth when they're trying to adjust the stream. If they're going up and down and seeing 30 or more structures to administer the call, they can't spend an hour or 2 hours in a structure going back and forth to get the flow right. So to secure the structure, so it must be able to be secured at the adjusted condition so as to prevent any unauthorized diversion or adjustment. Bob covered this pretty well on locking of head gates. It's like, one strike and you probably get a lock but usually we try not to do that. We sometimes our commissioners just work with people by calling them and saying, call's on, you can take half of your decreed amount, set your flume to this level, and then they may tag your structure. And if you do that and keep it that way, then that's the way it stays. If you go out and open it in the middle of the night and take all the water in the stream and we get notified that that's happening, then you're going to get a lock. So it has to be securable. That's where lockable and controllable comes from. So Rule 6 is all about the functional standard for these devices. So what accuracy do we expect when you install a structure? So obviously those pictures of those flumes that weren't in the stream are not accurate. So if it's in 6.1.2, for diversion structures that are greater than 1 CFS or have proposed flow rates of greater than 1 CFS, a measuring device or alternative measurement method has to be designed to accurately measure to within plus or minus 5%. And that's the kind of the standard for the best we could measure if we went out to verify your structure. The best we could, the most accurate we could be is within plus or minus 5%. So that's where that comes from. If you get smaller, as you go smaller in device structures, you're looking at for diversion structures with between 1/4 and 1 CFS, they have to be accurate to within 5/100ths of a CFS. That sounds really small. It's actually bigger than what 5% would have meant for that flow rate. So that's why we changed from a percentage to a CFS amount. And then for diversion structures less than 1/4 CFS, you got to talk to Bob. No, it is to say, it's an accuracy standard approved by the division engineer through the normal operating range, because it becomes difficult to set a specific percentage standard for that small of a water, for that small of a diversion. And then 615 is, it must be set within reasonable proximity of the diversion structure. So that's the reasonable time. Shall be properly installed in 616. That's that, you know, we need it to be maintained and installed. You have to have in 618 a rating table for it. So a partial flume has a standard rating table. We don't need you to provide us a special rating table for a partial flume. But if you put in a ramp flume, those are custom. If you put in a cutthroat flume, we don't have those rating tables. You would need to provide them to the division engineer's office or the water commissioner to make sure they know how to measure water infrastructure. So here's where we talk about what's the difference between an off-stream and an on-stream reservoir. So if you have an off-stream reservoir, it's a reservoir that does not have, it's not sitting on a natural stream, so there's not a stream flowing through it. It is off the stream and maybe there's a ditch that goes to it, delivers water to it, and then you release water back to the stream, or you pump out of it to make use of it for irrigation. So there's different requirements for the two different types. The primary difference is that for an on-stream reservoir in 6110, you need to have a outlet for sure that can pass the inflow. If the commissioners are administering the stream and you're out of priority, they need to make sure that they can send the water out of your structure to the downstream seniors in an amount that equals the inflow. The off-stream reservoirs but both of them require 2 of 3 different measurements. So if you have a reservoir and you have water coming into it on one side and water going out of it on the other, you either need to measure 1 of 3. You can measure the inflow, the outflow, or the volume. You got to measure 2 of those for us to be able to do the mass balance. Because if we know the outflow, so if you have a flume where you release water to the stream and you have a stage capacity table and a staff gauge that tell us how much water is in storage, we can back calculate what's coming in to make that diversion record. If you have the inflow and there's only one source of inflow and you have the storage, we can calculate what was going out. So 2 of those 3 are needed. For an off-stream reservoir, there's a special provision though that if you have an off-stream reservoir that maybe you take water only in the spring, and this is common for augmentation ponds, you put water in it in the springtime so that you can augment something in the fall or later summer, and you only are going to take water in and then you're going to release it later when there's no water coming in. You can do that with just the volumetric measure, because we can tell how much is going out or coming in by how much the volume changes. But once you introduce water coming in and going out at the same time, you can't do that anymore.
And so we would record that as an annual total.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you wouldn't see something taking place all year long. You'd see one record that says 20 acre feet.
Yeah. So the volumetric measurement is okay in those situations. For on-stream reservoirs, that is not an available option, because you can't control in an on-stream reservoir when you take water and when you don't. So you need 2 of the 3 things we talked about before, and an operable outlet. So recording device, you saw the picture of that box with the recording device. You also have the telemetry measurements. We don't have in Division 4 very many places where we have actually required a recording device, but the state engineer and division engineer do have the authority to require it if it's necessary to administer. In Division 1, which is the South Platte, almost everything has a recording device on it because of how tightly the administration occurs, all of the exchanges and crazy operations that occur to make sure water is not used out of priority requires it. In Division 4 and most of the West Slope divisions, we don't require it unless it's a Trans Mountain diversion where we have to have a really good record because we make reports to the UCRC on what water is taken out of the Colorado to other areas. Or it's maybe you do have an OG plan that you need that continuous record. But I guess the point is if we did need it, we could require it. This sets the standard for what would be required, 15-minute intervals. So we can't require you to give us a 1-minute interval. It has to be a 15-minute interval is the minimum. Temporary measurement methods. So if your flume washes out or you need a temporary ability to measure temporarily, there is a provision in here that would allow the division engineer to allow a temporary measurement method while you repair your flume or get a new one put in. So the verification, so this is how would we verify the accuracy of your device? So the most important one is the first one, 6.4.1. If a measuring device is properly installed and maintained and has a standard rating table, an adjusted standard rating table or a custom rating table,
Like a partial flume.
or a ramp flume with a custom table, yep. And a stage capacity table if it's a reservoir volume measurement. The division engineer shall presume that the measuring device is accurate and no verification will be required. So the assumption is that if you've put in a partial flume, for instance, and it's level and it's not submerged and there's flow through it, it's calm enough, you can read the staff gauge above it, then that's as accurate as we're gonna be going out there to verify it. So we're gonna assume that it is satisfying the measurement. If it's not level or if it's submerged, the water commissioner would probably do one of two things. They'd ask for a hydrographer to go out and measure it and confirm whether or not it's accurate enough within that 5% rating for larger devices. And if it's not, then you may get a notice that you need to install a new one or repair it. Or they would just, if it's really bad, they might just go straight to that without, some of them won't need verification, like the one setting off to the side of the stream, those kinds of things. But there may be situations where a flume is not performing. Maybe there's multiple flumes in a system and the mass balance just isn't working out from what people are taking, where the commissioner could ask for verification to check because it's just not working out and it's causing a problem with administration. So there is in 6.4.2, division engineer may rate or verify any measuring device at any time. So it does allow us to do that, but we would avoid that mostly. So the 6.4.4 and all of the subcategories under 6.4.4 are simply the requirement or standard for the equipment that those people take out, that the hydros take out to the stream or the qualified testers take out to the stream to measure, which there's standard meters are cups, spinning cups. You have a Doppler flow tracker meter or a Doppler boat is another option that we use to measure streams. That if you're going to use a qualified tester that is not, well, the division has to comply with these as well, but we already do. We already calibrate and make sure our devices are calibrated regularly. If you're using somebody else, they need to be using equipment that's accurate. They can't just use something that was calibrated 20 years ago. And yeah.
Does DWR have any literature or materials or educational materials about the proper way to install a flume? Because I know going out sometimes when we've followed up after working with a contractor to put a new flume in, it's not packed right. Sometimes the gravel's not right. You look underneath and there have been some things that we've had to change or have them go back and redo. Is there something basic that we could give people to say, you know, in order to make sure that your flume stays right and it doesn't tilt or, you know, get erosion underneath?
That's a good question. And yes, we do have some documents that we could share that have an installation guide. There's an old partial flume one that actually is out there that talks about installation. I'll have to remember, because it's been a couple of years now since we did some videos that we had a professional videographer do. One of them was on measuring flumes. I think that might actually have some information on installation, but I don't remember.
And RCS should have it too.
Okay.
Theirs isn't right.
Don't use theirs.
Don't ask that.
No, we've almost got even with, you know, it's a pain in the butt once you think your project's complete and your contractor leaves to get them back to do it right. And so
Yeah,
we thought that even with the contracts, that there's a flume in it, under our grant program, we could just give a flyer with it or something to say, this is something you should share with your contractor and make sure that he does these
Yeah.
things to install your measuring device properly.
and I know Division 6, the person managing the measurement rules in Division 6 was working on updating some of that documentation, so I haven't checked in to see where they're at. So hopefully we will have some good updated guidance.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's the 644. Moving on to 7, Rule 7. So we will essentially, the approval of a measurement method, the division engineer, we're going to talk about phase in here later. Office will be doing an inventory of the structures as we phase this in. And the commissioners will be looking at all the structures and defining whether they comply with the rules or whether they do not. And that may involve some verification. And then we will be notifying users whether they have a compliant structure or not. The exact method of, I think what we've landed on, at least in Division 6, who has rules that were signed last year, they're already in this process, is defining it in our database and then having an auto-generated email that goes out once they get to that point where they get to the end of their compliance period. We haven't gotten there yet, but that was the easiest way to do it. So having good email addresses in our system will be important. But it is technically the responsibility of the user to make sure they comply with the rules. So while that's practically how the process is going to kind of roll out, if you don't, if you're a user, and we don't have a ton of them here tonight, so we spread the word, and you haven't gotten a notice from the division office that, when you're getting close to that 1, 2, 3, or 4 year period we'll talk about here in a minute, you should contact the division office and say, hey, I've got this flume. I haven't heard whether it's acceptable or not under the rules, and ask, because there's there's 3,000 reservoirs alone in Division 4.
3,115 to be exact.
Okay. So there's thousands of structures, so we are bound to miss, 1 or 2. And so it is, technically, but that's kind of the practical rollout, how that's going to occur. So yeah, I think we can probably go to data reporting and submission. So this just reflects that the statutory ability or authorization that the state engineer, division engineer has to require a user to record and report at reasonable times the data for diversions by any structure. And that can include a recording device. Most of our records here in Division 4 are from water commissioner observations right now. But like Bob indicated, if your commissioner, like Jack, has a gigantic area and he gets to your structure every 2 weeks because he has such a large area to cover, and you want a better record, we would encourage you to submit a record to the commissioner, and they can include that in their diversion record. And we're working on ways to make that process easier as well, so. Inactive structures in Rule 9, so this is just reflecting that if a user is like, I don't use this thing much anymore, and I don't want to spend money on a flume for this structure, you could file to make your structure inactive, and then you're not going to get a notice that you have a non-compliant structure.
I have thought about that as well. It came up in that I've noticed that there was a time period where we had this proliferation of structures that were being alternate pointed to another structure. They didn't transfer them because you didn't want to give up that original, but that original structure is really inactive. And we actually, and I'm sorry I'm popping it here right now, but I've been thinking about that, and it seems to me like that's probably going to be the biggest percentage of these inactives, if I'm got this correct. And that if you have a water right that's being taken at this alternate point for 40 years, I mean, legally, it should be okay to say that this is inactive, I should think. I have to consult with my counsel.
The attorney.
Yeah, but I needed to bring that up because we did talk about it yesterday, and I apologize about that, but I've been thinking about it. And so that's going to turn out to be a significant number of structures if what I'm saying will actually, comport to this.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Bob.
Okay,
But those structures won't get that right won't get abandoned.
correct. The right's not abandoned.
Okay.
But the practical reality is that they've been diverting since they got their decree in 1981 for this alternate point from here.
Well, and there's ditches here that you get return flow off your neighbor.
Yeah.
And so you use your right for just a little bit, and then when he turns on, you don't need all that water.
And we have, and this sort of statement has made a lot of people nervous in the other divisions about abandonment, right? And I think the form that we have, that we've been using for Division 6, it has a statement in there saying like, this form in of itself is not any demonstration of a right to, of intent to abandon the water right. Now, I mean, is there still going to be the fundamental question of you haven't used this point of diversion for 40 years and have you abandoned this water right? Yes, but the measurement rules in this inactivation form aren't going to further that one way or another. Or that's the idea.
That would be the case regardless if you haven't taken water. But if it's the situation Bob mentioned, that wouldn't be cause to abandon the water right because you're taking the water right at other locations.
By decree, actually, yeah.
So even if you move your, say like, you're gonna fall under the rule of just, you need to move your diversion's not in the right place. And if you moved it 100 feet upstream or whatever, that would be it's much better for taking your water or something like that. Do they report back to you, or they were supposed to report back to you like, hey, we're not using that one? Or I've changed the location, or we're proposing to change the location of our flume?
If they did it in
Check with the
court,
water
if it was
commissioner?
done in court, it's a done deal. We make those changes to the database. And there is, you can move your stuff 500 feet
Right.
if you need to. Like a extreme monsoon event carved a channel out deeper. We need to move up, to get our water. We're gonna go up 300 feet.
We have a project in Tamichi Creek where we're actually proposing to move to a different location just because where it's at
Yeah.
seems to be degrading the stream a lot and not really working well. And so in those cases, I didn't know, yes, we're working under the 500-foot rule, but do we report back and
I don't think that would
say
be
to
an
you that,
inactive
hey,
anything.
Hey, it's
Nothing's
not here
inactive.
anymore. It's now here.
Yeah, that's just a change in point of
Change in
diversion.
point of
Yeah,
diversion, oh, yeah.
it's not, you're not having inactive. Inactive would be, I don't divert out of this structure, I divert out of that one.
I mean, you could certainly
But good
notify the
practice to
office
notify.
so that we can put because we do have locations for all the diversions, physical locations for them in our database. So we could change the physical
Yeah,
location.
you tell these guys, yeah.
Yeah.
The important ones are the water.
Well, Tamichi, yeah.
Yeah.
you talking about? So we're getting close to the end here, so you can, hopefully you had dinner before or you're close to home. But Rule 10 on non-compliance is what's going to happen if people don't comply. And so there's a couple of different things. If you get to the end of the compliance period and you don't have a device and we've notified you that you have a device that's not compliant, we could potentially send an order similar to what we would have done before. Or the rules specifically say that, the division engineer may also order the water user to curtail all diversions by a diversion structure until the water user is in compliance with the rules. So it somewhat reflects what we already have authorization to do in statute, but it makes it clear to everybody on this in Division 4 what the standard is. Variances, so people that, have difficulty, their physical situation of their structure, or, administrative situation surrounding their structure makes it difficult to comply with the rules. And, as written, can apply for a variance through the division engineer's office to do something different. And the division engineer would have the discretion to either approve that or deny it. So there's a process to appeal the decision. I don't think I need to read that. So if you have if a decision that is made under the rules, say we notify you that your structure is not compliant and you don't agree, there is a process to, well, first you go to your division engineer, then you could appeal that decision if you don't agree. Severability, legal language, revisions. Okay, so phase-in is the kind of the last important component. And so these phase-in timelines are similar to the ones that we have used in other divisions, but they're a little different. This is where the rules differ in some way, just because of the physical, the reality of our staffing, the reality of how the basin is situated. And in Division 4, what we've chosen to do for phase-in is for direct flow water rights. These timelines are the same as actually Division 6. For direct flow water rights with a capacity greater than or equal to 5 CFS, the deadline for compliance is 12 months after the effective date of the rules. So that effective date is, after we file, after it gets through the court process and is signed by the judge, and could be that signing date or some later date that we define. And for diversions with less than 5 CFS capacity, the deadline is 18 months. So you get an extra 6 months. For diversions with less than 2 CFS, the deadline is 2 years, so 24 months. Now, here's the difference between Division 4 and Division 6 and 7 is reservoirs with a capacity with a capacity or total water rates greater than or equal to 5 acre feet, the deadline is 36 months. So 3 years. And that was, in consultation with Bob and Division 4 staff, given the number of reservoirs, there's just a significant number of small reservoirs in Division 4.
Yeah, so much research to do to get our arms around that. We had to make a prioritization for those a longer period.
So, and then smaller reservoirs, less than 5 acre feet is 48 months, so full 4 years after the effective date of the rules, recognizing the difficulty of doing the inventory and getting the notices out. Division 7's was different. We did it 2 areas, non-critical and critical, because they have like half of their division is over appropriated and half of their division is not. And so it was easy to kind of split and do a 4-year timeline for the non-critical areas and the 2-year max timeline for the critical. This seemed to make more sense in Division 4. So I think that's it, because Rule 17 is just signatures, right? Effective date and the signature. So what questions there were, might you have? Comments? So if you need to think about it, please feel free to comment through the form.